So we received some of your questions regarding the subject of stress. We want to talk through those today in our discussion. And if you have additional questions that aren't covered in our discussion today, please leave them in the comment section down below, and we'll be happy to respond. See, the way the social sciences have kind of trained us all, because stress is now seen almost medically as this internal mental emotional turmoil that we all can have in the mind and emotions. And I'm not suggesting that we can't experience that mental emotional turmoil, because obviously we can. But then we assume a responsibility. It becomes a mindset. And now it's up to us, okay, how am I going to deal with this? What am I going to do with this? Rather than seeing our lives relationally, that we're never just on our own doing our own thing. That as a Christian, we're in union in Christ. We're in relationship with Jesus. So we're not just trying to figure this out, how to process this stressful moment. This is an external pressure. This is a trial that we're facing. There's no question about that. We're not in denial. But we're not doing so from the standpoint of internalizing it to where it affects me and begins to paralyze me, it begins to shape me, it begins to change the way I think about myself and then my responses to it. Okay, so you've got to differentiate. Yes, it's an external pressure, but it's not something that's supposed to dominate or change who I am. Who I am is consistent with who I am in Christ. And because of that, it's a united front where Christ and I are going to walk through this stressful moment from a point of victory rather than from a point of, I don't know what's going to happen, and I'm fearful about the outcomes and stuff like that. So it really is a mindset of our identity in Christ rather than a mindset of an emotional turmoil where we're allowing the circumstances to determine how we view ourselves and what potentially could happen to us. You see, we shouldn't be as concerned about the outcomes or what's going to happen to us, because we know who has us. We know who's in control. We know who ultimately we're going to work all things together for our good. And so when we're confident of that, when we're operating from that vantage point, it changes the dynamics of how we choose to walk through something. Instead of, being in this reactive mode, we're in more of a response mode. And we're resting and at peace even though it's a stressful moment. The moment I ask myself, how do I remember something? I've kind of disengaged myself from who I really am. Mm-hmm. It's God having revealed to me who I am and me living out of the reality of that. I'm no longer thinking about that. I'm living that. And until that becomes my reality, it's something I'm always trying to figure out. And that's the disconnect. And that's where people are struggling. So I don't know how to communicate. I know how to communicate. I don't know how to help people get there. Obviously, God's the only one that can get people there. But, that's where all of a sudden truths become living realities. And when they become a living reality, they're no longer just talking points. They really do become us in the sense that that's just how we now respond. And I'm not saying that we became Jesus or he became us. I'm just saying that union, that in Christ union, now becomes this natural outworking of how we deal with things, how we talk, how we do life. We're either living out a trusting relationship, or we've kind of set our relationship to the side. we're allowing the circumstances of the moment now to dictate how we're going to go forward. So we've got a new focal point now. It's not Christ. It's not who we are in Christ. It's not the norm. It's not the normal Christian life. So now we've let something else capture us. We've internalized it. It's rocked our world. And now we find ourselves trying to respond. That's stress. So are you stressed out? A lot of people are, obviously. Are you feeling overwhelmed? If so, guess what? You're not alone. In fact, a recent Gallup poll found that 8 in 10 Americans report feeling stressed. And what was amazing to me is that at the top of the stressful list was insufficient time to get everything done. Who can't relate to that? And what was even more shocking is that women are 10% more likely than men to say they lack sufficient time feeling stressed out. I thought that was really interesting. Now that might have something to do with, a lot of moms are, not only home and all those responsibilities, but also trying to work. I don't know, but I found that interesting. And people find themselves stressing over a wide range of issues, including, but not limited to, work, children, family, marriage, finances, just to name a few. I mean, we could go on and on, of course. And what's interesting also about the subject of stress is that it often leads to anxiety and depression. So people who are struggling with stress and anxiety report feeling less and less patient and more sympathetic to listen to other people's problems. So they're stressed out. They don't have the same tolerance to be able to be as patient, to be as engaged. So, as you think about that, do you try to get away from people as soon as you can? Might be an indication that you're stressed. Do you find yourself falling further behind in many of your responsibilities in day-to-day life? Do you feel tired most of the time? Even this whole idea of weariness can be a result of just being stressed. Not having as much fun as you used to? Again, might be that you're stressed. Do you feel trapped? You see, all these are indications that you may be under stress. So what is the solution to all the stress in our lives? Well, I think before we go any further, we've got to define our words. We've got to define what is stress and what it's not. Now, a little bit of science here. In the physical science realm, the word stress means simply means force brought to bear upon an object. In other words, it's pressure. And that's very scientific and can be proven. Unfortunately, the word has been transformed from the realm of the physiological sciences into the realm of what's called social sciences, which is, frankly, not always so scientific. And so, in the social sciences, the word stress is acknowledged. They acknowledge the external force brought to bear upon an individual. That's pretty obvious. But then they add the idea of mental and emotional tension, which they suggest is created by those external forces. Now, that's what's interesting about this. It's clear that this latter definition they've added to the concept of the word. So in their idea, it's both an external situation of life as well as an internal interpretation and response to the situations of life that are included in their understanding of stress. And that's where I would differ. You see, with this kind of an understanding, clearly the word has changed. It is now defined both as an external pressure as well as an internal interpretation frankly, a mindset, you see. And so it's important to recognize that regardless of our circumstances, we always have what? We have a choice as to how to respond to the pressures that we find ourselves facing. It's not like we're victims. Oftentimes we live that way, but we're not. So this is easily illustrated by the fact that you just take two different people. You take different persons experiencing identical external problems and pressures, and yet you have two very different responses. So the one person may respond with mental and emotional turmoil, i.e. they are stressed. Whereas the other person responds with peace and patience. Like they're chilling. Like, how can these two people be experiencing the same thing and yet have such different responses? So it seems we have inappropriately, excuse me, it seems we have inappropriately identified stress with our emotional turmoil and responses to all the situations of life, rather than simply understanding that we all experience stressful events in life. We're not immune to that, are we? It has been said, the situations of life do not make us the way we are. They only reveal the way we are. In fact, there's a great story, and I don't have time to go into it, but in Genesis chapter 50, Joseph said to his brothers, now these are the same brothers that sold him into slavery, and you remember the whole story of Joseph. You know, he ends up in the dungeon, in the prison of Egypt, and then finally finds himself to the palace of Pharaoh. But on that occasion, when his brothers come back to buy grain, he says in Genesis 50, verse 19 and 20, don't be afraid. They were fearful for their life. And then he asked the question, am I in the place of God? Am I in the place of God? You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about this present result, to preserve many people alive. Wow. You see, in saying this, Joseph reveals that he now understands why things didn't always go the way that he would have had them to go. There was a bigger purpose taking place in his life. He didn't understand it at the time. Essentially, Joseph is saying that even though he wasn't in control, and he certainly would have preferred a different outcome, God was always in control for the greater good. The bottom line is that Joseph lived by faith rather than stress, and so can we. How often do you and I find ourselves in circumstances that we would rather not be in? Like routinely, right? When we do, how often do we want to focus on ourselves and fail to see that something greater is happening? What is that something greater? God is at work. So it's simple. Let's start trusting and stop stressing.
We hope you enjoyed today's video on Life as God Intended. If you're not already subscribed, make sure you hit that button below so you get a notification every time we upload one of our weekly videos. Be sure to hop over to our blog where you can read articles and notes on today's message and sign up for our emails there. We'll see you back here in a few days, and until then, enjoy life as God intended.